So today I'd like to do a workshop that very briefly goes into some advanced texture mapping techniques and some different ways of compositing that I think should help you guys for the composite drawings. Now please note that I'm not showing an example of a composite drawing. This is just how to apply basically textures and various things to the object that I used for the first workshop. So I'll be talking a little bit about the kind of anamorphic projection for the texture misreading on the object. As you can see in this painting, from the front the skull looks warped, but when you look at the canvas from an angle that this was projected on, it basically has a true reading. And kind of with this fresco here, you can see that the texture is projected vertically onto the ceiling, and the projection is constructed so that basically the way the texture is projected, it works with the perspective to create this floating effect by not following the surfaces that the actual vault is made. So, and as far as composite drawings, I'd like to show a few very brief examples. So a composite drawing in essence is just several drawings that are composited on a single canvas. So this kind of reading, although it's not a composite drawing, this is kind of what is to be desired in terms of the rendering. So several textures that basically give the object a certain legibility that it otherwise wouldn't have, and kind of makes it less otherworldly, and kind of reveals what it's made out of. So this is an example of a composite drawing, a very simple composite drawing, but in essence it's several views on a page that are then kind of hybridized. You can see this like poche for the section of this object between two buildings is then used in a figural way on this page, and that kind of balances the composition. So this drawing, it uses shadows to connect these two views, and then but just on a very basic level, composite drawing is just several readings of the same thing on a single page. And Daniel found these from Sam Jacobs' Yale Studio that he's been referencing. So this is basically several drawings superimposed. So there's a section cut here, the white poche, then there's an oblique, then there's an elevation in the back, and kind of the white is being used to hybridize these drawings together. Okay. So to start, what we'll do, so in this drawing there's several layers. There's a very high resolution, basically base rendering. There's some texture, and then there's some shadow. So I'll be going through on how to achieve this in order to help you guys get some of your textures onto your models using techniques of anamorphic projection. So first, what we'll do is we'll put this object on this layer, and we'll use the layer to assign the material. So we'll go to custom, and then I use this shirt, which I scanned in order to get the basic pattern, and then I tiled it so that it's repeatable basically. So and I won't go over into how to do that here. So as you can see, this object is now on the red flowers layer. And so for the material, use layer material, okay. Oh, there it is. I forgot that Arctic doesn't render. So as you can see, when it's first mapped, it'll probably look something like this. This by default is how the texture mapping occurs, and you can basically use the UV editor button to kind of illustrate how everything is mapped. So each surface is basically laid out, and that's how these things are applied. So if you select a surface and you go into UV editor, you can actually start to change how, for example, how large the texture is. And you can sort of start to fiddle around, and you can start even projecting this texture at an angle. And just in case you want these meshes, you could just go cell mesh, then you could copy, and then you can close UV editor, and you basically have these meshes, which you can then mesh outline. And you have kind of your unrolled view, which might be interesting for some. But to not digress, let's go back to the rendered view. So instead of surface mapping and kind of any of these box mapping, where it's just projected from several sides, we'll be actually using planar mapping. So. And for the planar mapping, what I'll be doing is I'll be projecting the texture basically from this direction. So the texture will be being projected down. So kind of like here, the texture is being projected upwards, or here the texture is being projected from the side. We're kind of projecting it from the side here. So I just drew a plane with which I reference how it's going to be projected. So now what I'll do is I'll click this, and I'll just make sure that it's on the right layer here. Let me switch it to ghosted. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply planar mapping. And so what I'll do is I go 3-point, and so then it's mapped. And now what the critical step is here is you can go show mapping, and it actually let me hide this, and it actually shows you the size of the texture. So you can start playing around with basically how what the size of the texture is, and you can sort of start changing it. So you can also change it here. This is just the size of the texture. So I'll set it to I think 35 actually. So now the interesting thing is that from basically let me do the. So in essence, this view right here on the left is exactly basically like this, from the top, normal to this plane. So, and you can sort of start to see here how the texture, because of the planar mapping, it's being projected completely vertically down and kind of disregarding the shape of the object. So as a result, in side view, you can kind of see how the texture at the round edges it kind of falls off and gets distorted, and And this is very, very similar to kind of how this image is getting distorted, or if you look at this fresco from an angle and not from the bottom, you'll see those distortions. So this is basically the anamorphic projection. Now, a real anamorphic projection, you basically take into account the perspective of the camera, but we won't worry about that. I think parallel is good enough. And just a couple tips. The way you get here is you can set your view to isometric. This basically eliminates perspective in the view, and then you can type in camera. And so if you have multiple views open, you activate a certain view that you want to show the camera for. You type in camera. You can show the camera, and so now you can basically start editing the camera in order to match it. In order to match however you're projecting, if you're interested in getting this reading. We're going to be interested actually in the side reading of exactly how this texture falls off. So, and these are the portions of the rendering that I chose. So what the next step after this is basically I make 2D, and I just have two hatches. Now we'll be using these hatches to later cut out the rendering and put it on the object. So now I'll go through basically how to properly render this object now that you have the texture mapped. So let's go into the right view, and then what we'll do is we'll go to these render settings here. It's important that you set a high enough resolution. It doesn't need to be absurdly high, but something like that's usually fine. We'll do a square rendering. So for the backdrop, we'll be using a transparent background, and then this is where you basically get to control several things. Let's actually move this material elsewhere to another layer. So we basically moved it to another layer, got rid of the texture, so that first we can get the very basic pass. And what we'll be doing to get that is we turn the skylight on, and we use the studio environment, the default studio environment, but we don't use the sun. So what this does is it gets rid of the shadows, and I'm going to hide everything else just so it doesn't get in the way. That was invert hide, by the way, for the selection. So now I think we're ready to render. The key things to check is transparent background and the skylight. So everything else should be fine. So now we render. And I'm not going to make you guys sit through this. So I'm just going to show what it looks like in the end. So this is basically the rendering that you get. Basically, if you only have the skylight and you don't have a sun, you get very gentle shadows, and this is a good starting point. What we'll do next is we actually turn on the sun, and here you can basically edit the sun settings and basically get shadows that appeal to you. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, usually the sun comes from the south. So, but for example, something like this. And then this we can actually, we'll render as well. and then you get something like this. And so when you save these things, don't forget to save them as a PNG with the transparent background on. That basically ensures that you only get the actual data. You don't get the background that you then need to cut out. So the last thing that we'll render is we'll render the actual texture. So we'll move this object back to the red flowers layer. And it's wonderful, it actually keeps the mapping that was assigned to it. And so then we will turn on skylight and sun, so you kind of get this kind of reading. If you don't have sun on, it looks it looks even flatter. So this is fine for our purposes. And then you render it again, and then the result that you get is this. So I'll now go into Illustrator. I'll open up a new file, and then I'll start dropping these things in. So I'll first drop this one in, just the base. I'm going to make it 8 by 8. I'm going to center it. Oops. So now it's in the center. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to then drop. Well, then what I'll do is I'll actually go to this file, and I'll extract the shadows from here. So what you can do is you can go color range, you pick the shadows, you invert your selection, then you delete everything else besides the shadows. So and this is what you actually save. Then all of a sudden your shadow pass kind of looks like this. So you use the same size for this one, so it falls exactly where it's supposed to fall. Oops. Put it into a new. So this is, we'll call this shadow, call this base. So for this shadow pass, what we'll actually do is we'll select this image, and we're actually going to turn this pixel data into vectors. So we go Window, Image Trace. So and then this is the stop. You go to default, and then you can set it to black and white, advanced, ignore white, and only make fills. And then this is usually fine. So then this is your result after it traces it. And so what you end up with is a series of vectors that then represent different parts of the shadow. And this is a complete vector, you know, with a fill and a stroke. You can make them red if you want. That's annoying. For the color, it's not giving me RGB. So if you go here, you go RGB, and now it'll be red. But yeah, so, but now what we can do is we can, in effect, use hatches within Illustrator to now start kind of illustrating these shadows. And this kind of starts to reference this kind of situation where you have these hatches on top of the drawing. So and this I think is basically what Brian Cantley's doing with the shadows, although I could be completely wrong. But what we do is we go under swatches, so Window, Swatches, and then you go under Patterns, Basic Graphics, Basic Graphic Lines, So then you basically can start picking and choosing. If you want to edit this thing, you can go, well, first I forgot, we need to make a compound path, selecting all the hatches, so that it's actually one path. That's very helpful. And now what you can do is you can go to pattern, edit pattern. Now you can sort of start making it pink or whatnot. So that looks pretty cool. Now what we'll do is we will drop the texture layer. Okay. So now that we're here, we will actually use, this make 2D, and this is just to make 2D from the side, and I just basically hatched that area. So we have two hatches, and this is the important part. So this is the data that we'll really be using, but we go and we export this thing. So we have it here. We bring it over here, and then we size it up to be the same size. And so now what we do is we'll just make the curves white. And then for these guys, we'll be using this actually to cut out okay. So we need to make a compound path first. Object. So we made a compound path, which will be then used as the clipping mask. So essentially this is it. So this is basically just how you get textures into your composite drawings, because I'm just worried that I feel like a lot of you maybe don't have the technical facility in order to render these things well, and I think it's definitely possible to render at a decent level without using V-Ray or another plugin. However, we will be going over that in the future, and that'll make this process a lot easier. But for now, with the tools that you have, I think that this is kind of good enough in terms of getting good quality data out of the program. So I hope that you enjoyed the workshop. I tried to make it brief, but it looks like it wasn't very. So as far as the assignment, you can, if you basically use planar mapping of the rendering of the object itself. Let's actually do that out of curiosity right now. So let's go to rendered. Let's make a new layer, red. We'll call it Red Flowers Meta, because it'll be a projection of itself onto itself. We do custom, we go color, and we'll actually use this. Let's see what this does. Let's not use the alpha. So instead what we will do is Since it's a rendering from here, we'll go to texture mapping. We'll again use planar mapping. And we'll see kind of the really freaky stuff that starts to go on as you start to project the object onto itself. And then you can go show mapping. Again, you have this box that pops up, and then you can start to kind of twist and turn and play about how this thing is being projected onto itself. So I hope that this was moderately helpful. There's a bunch of other mapping systems that you can go into, and also you can play around with the UV editor to kind of see how, if you want to actually alter the mapping and get some kind of desired result, you can. So these are the tools that can help you get there. So hopefully I helped a little bit. So hope to see you guys soon in class. Thank you.